Bo and Luke Nation, welcome to this episode of the Bo and Luke Show. I'm your co-host, Bo Bravo, and I have in studio my dynamic rock star, guitar wall hanging co-host, dynamic Luke Kerrigan. We have a really cool kind of show, I think, coming up in this episode. You know, Luke, our motto for the show is be better, know better, do better. And we preface that with the B is, you know, having the right mindset that you actually want to do better at the end. Know is knowledge. We got to go out there and seek development, personal development, professional development. And then the do part, I think the most important piece is having the courage to actually do and execute on all the things that you're learning along the way, and then have that mindset to just be that continuous improvement and continuous learning kind of individual. And that's why we love having the guests that we have with us today, leadership development experts. They're the leaders of Let's Grow Leaders, their company. They're authors. They're writing amazing books to help everybody in the workplace. We have David Dye and Karin Hurt with us. We're going to get into their new book, Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict. I love it because we all know you either have people that can do it and they like being able to resolve issues before they become giant issues. They're not afraid of conflict, but then we have a large number of people who just don't like conflict at all. Conflict avoidance, right? So without further ado, David, Karin, welcome to the Bo and Luke Show.
Thanks so much for having us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Awesome. Well, let's just roll, kick it off. David, you want to go first, or Karin? Doesn't matter to me. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, your 90-second elevator pitch.
Karin, ladies first. You kick us off.
All right. So we run, as you said, a company called Let's Grow Leaders. We're known for very practical tools and techniques for human-centered leaders, leadership development that sticks. Prior to founding Let's Grow Leaders 11 years ago, David and I were both executives. So I was at Verizon for 2 decades, did everything from human resources to leading a 2,200 person sales team, a 10,000 person customer service organization. I'll let David introduce himself, but why we do what we do is because we learned a lot of this the hard way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I led a human service organization for 17 years and helped that expand around the country. And, you know, when we talk about powerful phrases for dealing with workplace conflict, the reason that, and this is the 6th book I've written, Karin, I've written a number of these together. And the reason we wrote this one is because we're seeing with so many of our clients and so often in the workplace, there's this rising tide of conflict, and it seems like more of it, more intense, new forms, especially after the pandemic. And so many of our clients are coming to us and saying, hey, can you just give me the words to use in this scenario, in this situation? And what do I do here? Just give me the words. And it's not that you can script out an entire conversation. No one can do that. But what you can do is have the specific words that will help you open the door to a meaningful, productive, collaborative conversation. And we all need more of those in our work.
Amazing.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
This is something, Bo, that just it is so important because it bleeds outside of work, right? That you just manifest this in your mind. Like this goes into mental wellness because anytime you're just not dealing with conflict well, guess what? Well, there goes your whole day. Time with your family isn't as effective, etc. Right? So I'm so pumped to dive into this.
Yeah, it's kind of what you reference in the description of your book on Amazon, talking about the anxiety and stress that people feel, right, gets built up. And I think, Luke, to what you're saying, it can build up if you're not dealing with that conflict at work. And then the bleed over into home life can be horrendous. And then you're just finding people to blame for all of that stress. So let's jump in and start first with the persona of the individual in the workplace, or even in their own personal life, where they just avoid conflict. They'll do everything they can to just avoid it because they don't know how to deal with it. They don't have the phrases to open the conversations. Whatever their fears are, what are your insights on that type of individual?
Yeah, I want to start with compassion for that person. I've been that person, right? I mean, early in my career, I had a moment where our CEO was doing this marketing event, and I was at my wit's end because I really felt like it lacked integrity, and he was being disingenuous. And all the bleed over you're talking about. I'm at home. I'm up all night. I'm tossing and turning. What do I do? And stewing. And I didn't say anything for 3 or 4 days. because CEO, right? And what am I going to say? And I didn't have any of these powerful phrases. I didn't know any of this kind of thing. And finally, very inelegantly, nothing that we would recommend from the book and what we know to do now. But I finally popped my cork after several days of not sleeping well and said, I can't do this. I don't like this. This lacks integrity. I can't be a part of this. And, what do you think he said next?
Oh,
Yeah, I was ready for, exactly. I was ready for him to say, well, hey, there's the door, buddy. Let me help you pack, but that's not what he said. What he said was, David, I don't see it that way at all. I don't think this lacks integrity. My conscience is clear, but I don't want you to violate your integrity. And then he asked me a really important question, and one we would recommend that we're asking ourselves going into these conversations. He said, so what do you think we can do to make this work? How could this work for you? And all it took was thinking about it for 5 seconds. Literally that fast, like, well, what if we just did this? What if we told the people coming to the event that this is the case? Boom, problem solved. He said, yeah, we can do that. Let's do it.
Wow.
And it was an amazing moment for me to learn. And he taught me so much in that moment. Some of what I learned was that if I stay silent in those moments, so we're talking about the person who's uncomfortable with conflict. I get it. You don't want to damage relationships. You worry about losing status, career, whatever is the case. But what's possible if we do say something? In this case, my silence was depriving him of the chance to make a different decision and for me to learn something. And so in those situations, silence can actually be selfish. And so the opportunity that we give one another by raising our hand and having the conversation, there's some really good ways to do it, which is what all the words in the book are about. But at the bedrock of it, for me, that's why it's so important.
Yeah. Dave, did you find after that moment where you popped your cork and then you had that experience with the CEO, right? Did that change you then almost forever? And then did you help others saying, hey, anybody else you were working with that wanted to share something and who were fearful that it's not going to go the way you think it's going to go in your mind?
Bo, I'd like to say that transformed me overnight. I think it was a longer process, but here's what I can say. I actually just last week had a reunion with some of the folks that I worked with those years ago. I mean, it's been decades now. And one of them, who I was thanking for some things he had done and that he had taught me, and he said, hey, I want to thank you. And he said almost word for word what you just said. He said, you taught me all those years ago that it's possible to have the conversation no matter what's going on and that we can get there. And so that definitely has been a part of my journey. And I'm still on that journey, still learning and still hopefully growing in this ability to have meaningful conversations.
Yeah. I think
Amazing.
if you are really scared to have a conversation, I'd ask yourself a couple of questions. Why does what you have to say matter? What's at stake if you stay silent? And how will you feel if you've had the conversation and you've at least been heard? You may not have the outcome that you hope for, but at least you've learned something in that whole process. And how will you feel after you've had the courage to have the conversation?
Yeah, Luke, don't you think that question, I think a lot of people would say, what's at stake if I say something? If I say something, right? Because then you're thinking, oh, I could get terminated. I'm going to get fired. Like, this isn't going to go well for me. But if you just flip the question, what's at stake if I stay silent? That changes your whole thought process and about what it is that you have to say.
Well, it helps identify the problem because it's just manifesting itself. It's your own internal problem at that point. What David said, the other person's like, well, I don't see it that way. And poor David was over here just banging his head up against the wall with anxiety, trying to figure this out. Like there's so much that goes on between our two ears. So I love flipping that and saying, well, what is the consequence of staying silent? What is going to happen? I think there's a lot of power in that, right? To at least calm your mind and have that conversation.
Yeah. And I would imagine, Karin and David, that when someone that you're working with can actually get to the point and they flip that question and they're asking themselves that and they're taking note of, what the consequences are of staying silent, that it can help them phrase what it is that they then need to say so that they're saying the right thing and they don't just go in there. It's a great story, right? And it's a great experience, David. It's like, I just had enough. Like, I'm going to go just basically almost explode on a CEO, right? Because I can't hold it in anymore. that they don't do that, that they actually go in there with a well thought out cognitive like thought process and what they want to explain.
Yeah. And Bo, the irony of this whole thing is what we say, why people are afraid often is, well, I don't want to hurt the relationship. But if you don't have the conversation and all you do is make up what you think they think and you don't actually know, you're not building the relationship by that. You're actually destroying your relationship. And
Yeah.
but David had more respect for that CEO because he had the conversation. Their relationship improved.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember an experience back in my White House days, and I had this one gentleman, and whenever it was like group type of meetings with the chief of staff, I learned so much just from watching this one person, because I think he had figured all this stuff out already about the conflict, and he was senior to me, but just watching him interact and the questions that he would ask, how he would get his point across, and actually enrich the whole conversation. He had no fear, but he was definitely ready to have those conversations. It was powerful. So I think learning from people we watch,
yes,
if we're paying attention, can be powerful.
So true.
I think it comes down to, like, I think about duty a lot as well. Like, what's my personal duty? And I think about it in two ways. So one, it's my personal duty to myself and the company to say something in the right arena. So David, I'm still using your example here. So I like to think like in the present moment, it's my duty to the company to say where I think there's risks or pitfalls or what I don't agree with. However, on the flip side, and Karin, this I think goes into staying silent too. If I stay silent, it's also my duty to then go and execute that vision that was put in place and execute whatever was put in front of me for the company and my role, right? And that's just something sure, there's times where I just have to eat it, right? And say, you know what?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go execute this now because guess what? I didn't fulfill my duty to speak up. And I think that helps. At least me internally, I figured that out.
Yeah.
That it's really helpful to think about it that way.
That's powerful, Luke. I love that.
Yeah, when we're talking about like managing up, and we wrote the book to be like, there are the framework, the foundations of having these conversations, but they're also chapter by chapter where you can just say, okay, what's going on in my work life right now? Oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I need to say no. What do I do? Even to say no to my boss potentially, and managing up. We have a responsibility to share information that we know that maybe they don't. And so, your manager comes with a project that's going to overwhelm and derail something else. Well, if we don't say anything, that's not being a team player. Luke, I love how you express that. That's a duty, a responsibility. So if I do say something, and we have powerful phrases to help with that, say, hey, listen, so what would a successful outcome do for you here? Okay, let me understand what you're trying to achieve. Awesome. So here's the consequences I see. If we do this, this is going to shift this. It's going to have this impact here. And I'm concerned about that because of X, Y, and Z. And then I might come with a solution. So here's one way we could address that. We can shift this. We can move that. We can resource this differently, whatever it is. Or we could make this call. How do you see it? What do you think we could do here? Right. And then getting their perspective on it. But we're sharing that information, giving them a chance to enter into that. And, so often we get frustrated. Well, they should know. No, they've got all their own stuff going on and you don't know what's going on in their world. You don't know what's going on in your employees' world. Like, for you to be able to share that is critical.
Agreed.
Agreed.
I like to tell people, I say, look, here are my thoughts, but just so you know, to preface this, if this is a dumb idea, because half my ideas are dumb, I'm still going to go 100% execute your plan. But here are my thoughts, right? And I feel like that disarms them a little bit so that they know that, like, I'm not coming up against them. I'm still going to do their idea and execute it to its fullest, but give me a chance to talk and maybe the idea will change a little bit.
Yeah. David and Karin, how do you, in your development programs, how do you help folks along the lines of getting to the point like where Luke's not afraid to share those ideas to make sure, because he knows when you leave the meeting, like, this is what we're going after to accomplish, and we kind of all need to have buy-in to that. I'm sure you've run across leaders, I know I have in my past, where you have the meeting and they provide for an open environment to get all those ideas, but they'll preface it with, okay, this is what we're here to do. We can all have disagreement. We can have conflict, but when we finish, like, we need to all be on the same page, right? So it's like, speak your mind or forever hold your peace kind of thing. So when you have those individuals that you're in your development programs who need help getting there, what are some of the ways that that you help them make sure that they're sharing their voice
Yeah.
in those scenarios?
Yeah. So we start with those first couple questions, like why does it matter and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then we teach 4 dimensions of constructive conflict. So connected, are we connected as human beings? Clarity, do we have shared understanding of success? Curiosity, are we showing up genuinely interested in what's possible here? And then commitment, do we have a clear agreement going forward? Right? Because if you can help people say, to think about this is less about the conflict, this is more about the outcomes. And so in any situation, what's most needed here? So you're afraid to speak up. Well, how do you show up in a connected way, connected to your intent for the conversation, connected to the humans in the room? And so that now it's not about you, right? Like I'm afraid. You're connected to the bigger why for doing what you're doing. And so it's actually selfish to stay silent in those areas. And then the next thing we do is give them some exact words they can use if they need them, right? And so, we call these the GOATs, the greatest of all time powerful phrases. There are 3 GOATs for each dimension. And what we encourage people to do is, and we practice this in the program and say, okay, here's the situation. What dimension would you use and which GOAT would work here? And so you get people to practice and then they realize, well, that conversation didn't feel stinky or hard, right? So that's one place to start.
So often, and there's 2 sides to these conversations, right? So you're the person needing to raise your hand or needing to say something, or you the manager or the leader of the conversation who's asking for that input. And both, it's important how you're doing both of those things. And so if I'm the person who's raising my hand, that ability to say, if I don't already know, that ability to ask for that outcome Karin was just talking about is critical. So that's one of the GOATs for clarity, is to make sure we have a shared understanding of success. I can ask, what would a successful outcome do for you? And when we ask that, it helps get us off of whatever, plan I have. Well, this is what I want to do. And so I'm not just looking at the plan. I'm asking, what is it that we're trying to do with that? What's that going to achieve for us? Now I can start to offer solutions that help get us there that might be way more effective. And so if I know what the leader of the conversation or the organization, the company or whatever, whoever it is trying to achieve, now I'm in a much better place to try to address that with my ideas. And so that you're automatically giving anything that's going to come out of your mouth next more legs and more chance to be heard. And you come across as a more strategic partner, just by virtue of knowing what you're trying to solve for.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant.
Now, would the advice change at all if you're dealing with a leader? So first of all, they're a leader. They're higher than you, not a peer. And this person is just unreasonable and rude all the time. Does your advice change a little bit, or is it still the same? How do you handle those situations?
So I would start in that there's a chapter on what if my boss is a screamer and a dropper of F-bombs.
Yeah,
so
there we go.
Is that what you're talking
yeah,
about?
That's
Guys like
exactly
that?
it, Karin. Perfect. Yes.
So I would start with connection, right? I really care about, and something that you really care about. You really care about him or her, and want them to be successful. You really care about the team and the important work that you're doing. You really care about the customers, whatever it is that you can genuinely look this human being in the eye and say you care about, and then say, and I've noticed. And then give a very specific example of what the destructive behavior that you're noticing. We actually had one client we were working with, and he was a screamer and a dropper of F-bombs. And he didn't think it was impacting people because, we're all cool, tough guys and it's fine. That's just how it is around here. But we happened to hear from a lot of people that it was bothering them and it was intimidating them. And so we encouraged a couple of people who we knew he respected to say, you know what? I've noticed that in this meeting, you used the F word 17 times.
Wow.
And I got to tell you, there are some people on this team, including myself, for whom that is counterproductive. Like, it is stressing people out. And I've also noticed, I saw these three people just shut down in the meeting. Did you see that too? Did you see that they stopped talking and we are in so much pressure at this moment in time that we need everybody's creative minds working together, speaking up, doing what needs to be done. And I think your style is jeopardizing, and we're not going to be as good as we could be. He listened.
Yeah.
So here's the funny thing, that he solved it with humor. He did what we call a mini personal experiment, which is do something that feels a little scary to you for 30 days and see what happens. That's easy to implement. So he just said, instead of, whenever I want to use the word F, I instead am going to use a silly word like pickle juice. And so he was able to, he would use the word, so people still knew he was upset, but it also lightened the mood. And they were like, oh, we don't want you to be that mad. And then they would have the conversation.
Yeah.
These pickle juice results.
Yes, this is amazing. I like.
Yeah, that's a great tactic.
I like to use humor. I've tried this a couple times. You can add this to the book if you want. You probably won't, but when someone's just irate, to use humor, and I say, like, I just look at them very seriously and say, I understand that behind anger is hurt, and you must really be hurting a lot right now. So I want you to know that I'm here for you. And usually it lightens the mood like crazy, because they're just kind of like, okay, like, this isn't that big of a deal. We're at work. It's just a job. Like, come on.
And that's, Luke, I know you say it tongue in cheek with the humor, but that's actually a very compassionate, depending on how you're saying it, thing to say. Hey, I am, in our connection phrases, we talk about reflecting to connect and acknowledging the emotion that we're picking up from somebody. That can include our boss, can include a colleague, can be a client, can be a customer, can be our direct report. Right. And so that just looks like reflecting back. It sounds like you're really frustrated here. It sounds like you're really angry here. Do I have that right? And checking in, are we picking up the emotion? So connect at that level is one of the fastest ways we can build connection, lowers the intensity of that. Then we can go to that follow-up question that you just asked, so what's behind that? I know there can be a lot of hurt behind anger. So what's going on?
And I love it because you're labeling things right now. You're not attacking the person. You're labeling it and calling it something like frustration. So it's not an attack on them. That's like a lot of nuanced tips and tricks in one little phrase there. I like that you pointed that out.
Yeah. So does your book, who's the primary reader of your book? Is it that someone just trying to get into the conflict resolution and learn how to ask the right questions or have the right phrases in order to start having the conversation? Or does it also help folks get past that first question, get past that first phrase, and anticipate what potential responses can be so that they know they can take that conversation, to a different level? This
book is really for any human being who has to work with somebody else.
I like that.
And honestly, our other books are more leadership and culture books. More for people who are people managers. This book, on purpose, was to be the other side of that, to empower anyone who has something important to say, to be able to say it. And it's so interesting to me how it plays out in different scenarios. So we were actually in Southeast Asia with, and our 18-year-old son was with us on this particular trip. And his calculus teacher writes to Sebastian, our son, and says, does your mom have any powerful phrases for this situation? And it was like she was dealing with rowdy students who weren't paying attention.
Yeah. Conflict in her classroom for sure.
And to the point of walking through the conversations, we definitely, there's two ways to read the book. One is to get those principles and those 4 dimensions that Karin mentioned, and then the GOATs, the greatest of all time questions that you can use in so many different circumstances. But the power of those 4 dimensions is that you can walk through a conversation, paying attention to each of those, making sure we're connected as human beings, making sure we have a shared understanding of what a successful outcome will do for each of us, and that we're hearing each other correctly, that we're asking good questions, being open to different perspectives, and then creating a shared path forward. Any productive collaboration conversation goes through those four. Now, they may not be right in that order, but we want to make sure that we're checking all those boxes in the course of the conversation. And so a number of these different scenarios, we go through how that looks. So just take the micromanager for a moment. You were asking who's the book oriented to. Everybody has encountered a micromanager. It's funny, we talk about micromanagement. We got CEOs going, yeah, my board micromanages me, right? And so often it's easy to think of, a middle manager as the micromanager. It happens to everyone. And so how do we have that conversation? Let's make sure we're connected. Let's make sure we're clear about what success looks like and what's it going to do for us. Okay, now let's ask the question. Hey, I noticed you've asked about this 5 times. What's going on? How can I help you get what you need here? And how can I be, able to focus and get the work done, or so you're not, keep interrupting me, keeps setting me back, and we can have that conversation. So it's a both and of all of those angles.
I like that. That's good stuff.
Love it.
Yeah. So David, Karin, let's just, all that you've written about, and from the culture perspective, leadership, well, let's say leadership, but when you bring culture into it, and if you look at culture as an outcome, at least that's kind of how I think of it, based upon how we are all coming together and behaving in the workplace. Have you seen in the clients that you work with, when you help them deal with conflict, right, and they start to understand and they start to resolve conflict before it becomes a big issue, are those clients seeing massive improvement in their morale, in their workplace, in their culture of their organization? And is that translating into improved results for their business as a whole?
Yes. What we really see is if you can first of all, you give people a common vocabulary, because culture, our favorite definition of culture really comes from Seth Godin. People like us do things like this, right? And so have you clearly defined what it is that people like us do? And if what people like us do is first create real clarity, you got to create clarity, about what expectations. And most bad conflict, can be prevented with better clarity. So if we've done a shift to working from home, do we have real clarity about when cameras are on and when cameras are off? If we say we're moving to an office occasional environment, what does that actually mean? If we say you can work from anywhere, do you really mean from anywhere? Is the petting zoo okay? Do you, and so it's like getting that clarity. And so what we're seeing is that companies, and the book before this was called Courageous Cultures, is companies that can get really aligned around clarity and really teach people about curiosity, how to show up really curious in what's possible in one another, and then to be able to have those conversations and keep people really focused on the most important things. You have a lot less wasted time, you have increased productivity, you have better ideas, you have more innovation, and all that translates to the bottom line.
Got it.
100%.
So for sure. I think the clarity piece is we could talk about that for another couple hours alone, and everything that can come from that. What are some of the things you see when you step into a client, right? And they haven't done these things. They aren't curious. They are not fostering clarity in the environment. Their managers and leaders aren't providing clear expectations. What are those instances like when you're stepping into that client for the first time and you're like, whoa, we have work to do?
There's a couple of things that you'll see happen a lot. And so like one of the things is that conflict is not normal. It's not healthy. It's not a part of the norm of the organization. When we say conflict, we're talking about productive conflict. You'll have a lot of destructive conflict where people are super frustrated at each other. And so let's just take back to culture, talking about values. One of the most neglected aspects of the conversations around values is, what do you do when values conflict? And if you have good, meaningful values, they should conflict with one another sometimes. Like, okay, we've got we're really about healthy balance and taking care of every employee. And we have this value about serving our customer, and we go the extra mile for the customer and so forth. Well, okay, those can conflict. What do we do? How do we resolve those? And so frequently, like, that's a top level thing, but then you get to the level of like organizationally in the day-to-day work, a manager has an expectation. They've got a deadline to meet. They haven't told their folks about that. They haven't been clear about what success looks like because they don't want to risk that conversation. And then people are not doing what they would hope, but the manager's frustrated. The team's in conflict with one another because they're working from two different scripts. Well, I thought this is what I was supposed to do. Well, no, I thought this is what we're supposed to. And you get a lot of those kinds of frustrations and conflicts at every level because we haven't invested in the clarity. We haven't learned the tools to have the conversations to help us get there. The reality is none of us can read each other's minds. None of us are on the same page all the time. I don't know about you. I'm telepathetic. I can't read anybody's mind. I have to have the conversation. And so
Yeah.
that's what, when you walk into an organization like that, that's typically what's happening. The frustration, the wasted time, headache, heartache, and all that lost energy. And top performers don't want to be a part of that. So they get out of there as soon as they can.
Yeah, and one of our clients when they called us in, he's like, my problem is I just have a bunch of damn doers.
Yeah.
So, right? Like people were just keeping their head down and he's like, they're just doing stupid stuff. They're doing things the way they always have been. They're doing things because they're scared to say anything. Yeah. And that he's like, that's the transformation I need. I need people to think before they do. Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting, I love that comment. Was literally at a conference a couple of weeks ago, having a similar conversation on the sales front about prospects. And when you run into that, you can tell pretty quickly those people who are doers. And I think there's a whatever it is, a level of fear in making change. So, and being curious, right? I think that's a big one, right?
Yeah.
Of being curious about what's possible.
Yes.
But if you're so focused on just being the doer, that stuff is tough to change. You need people like yourselves to come in external and help them fix that. This has been amazing. Luke, any questions?
No, I'm just very grateful to have you both on. I feel like I learned a lot today. And what's good about it is I can go implement this immediately. Like I got more meetings this afternoon and I'll probably go.
Are they with Bo?
No, they're not.
No.
This is with other people. I'm going to try out some new material this afternoon. This is good stuff.
Luke, you're going to have Brad listen to this episode. So Luke's company works for Phenom. Their co-founder, Brad Goldor, we had him on the show, but part of their culture is not normal.
Yeah.
So I want to get his take. So I think based upon David's, like, conflict's not normal. So I want to know from Brad if he has a lot of conflict in Phenom because it's not normal. Right?
Yeah, there's conflict everywhere. Right? I think we're decent at it, but it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's how you deal with it, right?
That's right. Absolutely. Well, David and Karin, we always give our guests an opportunity at the end of the show we've been talking about your book, but let people know how they can find it, how they can get in touch with you, your company, tell people happy birthday, whatever you want to do. So for the next couple minutes, it's the David and Karin show. So take it away.
So the book is Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict. What to say next to de-stress the workday, build collaboration, and calm difficult customers. It is available pretty much everywhere books are sold. And if you are, we know that a lot of times if you're a podcast listener, it means you want to hear it on Audible versus reading it to yourself. And it is on Audible, read by us, which was
nice.
a lot of fun. And our website is letsgrowleaders.com. And if you go to the books section there are so many completely free downloadable resources that are a companion guide to the book. So you can read it as a book. I just got a note from CHRO where I'm reading this as a book group. Thank you for the collaboration guide, right? So there's a collaboration guide with, and there's activities and training activities, all this stuff that makes it super easy to implement and practice and have these conversations with your team so you get good at conflict in a safer way. And so that's where it's start. And we'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'm Karin with an I, Karin Hurt, and then David Dye, D-Y-E.
Amazing. David, any final thoughts?
Yeah, we were, we have a lot of these conversations with folks. And if I have a final thought for anybody that's listening and you're thinking about a conversation, you're not sure, gosh, do I have the phrase? I'm looking at the book. The most important thing you can do is have the conversation. Just go have the conversation. So I had somebody that I was doing some coaching work with a couple months back, and really frustrated situation. Won't get into all the details, but walked him through what to say, how he might approach it. He texts me 3 days later and says, I'm going to get a tattoo. I said, okay, well, what's the tattoo going to say? I write him back. He writes me, just have the conversation. It's like, he's like, it's what on earth was I preventing myself from achieving, accomplishing, learning, growing, relationship, everything, because I didn't have it. So that's my final thought. Just have the conversation.
I think that's amazing. That's super powerful.
Love it.
Luke, any parting
No,
comments?
just thanks so much for joining. I learned a lot. I think the listeners will too. And I'm going to go forth and avoid conflict. It's going to be great.
Well, thank you for all you do to encourage courage. Really appreciate it.
That's right. Excellent. Bo and Luke Nation, you have been listening to David Dye and Karin Hurt, Let's Grow Leaders. Be sure to go check out their book, get yourself a copy, because I think we could all of us could use that. I don't think we can have enough phrases and questions to approach a conflict situation and be fully prepared to do that. So with that, that's a wrap.